If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to episode 10. In this episode, we will be interviewing author and professor of English, James Morrow. So, Kat, how are things going?
They're going pretty well here in the Pacific Northwest. Getting kind of mossy and green and getting dark at about 5 p.m., as happens in the winter here, but it's placid.
Yeah, same here. We have recently put up our Christmas tree, so we're all Christmassy here now. Getting ready for the holiday season.
That's fun. I mean, although, God knows when it's sort of in isolation, it's just sort of like we're going to flavor the days now with a Christmas theme, right?
Right, exactly. And we're like stressing out over, okay, because we have a COVID bubble, if you will, where... because my parents watch the kids and that sort of a thing while we're working. So, we can invite my parents, but who else do we invite? Can we invite anyone else? And then, of course, navigating the family politics of that decision.
Yes. Well, 2020 will be over soon.
Oh, thank goodness. Before we get started, I do have a couple announcements for our people out there. First of all, I just want to encourage everybody to go check out Zigzag Claiborne's new novel, Afro Puffs Are the Antenna of the Universe. That'll be out soon. I believe it's out in the next, but early December, I believe.
I think it's very soon.
Yeah, and even though that's a sequel to his first novel, Leviathan, you can enjoy it without reading the previous book. I have his confirmation on that. So go out and check that out. He is wild and crazy. And also, I want to mention that we, as the podcast, will be having a holiday party on January 2nd at 4 p.m. EST. So anyone out there who wants to come and see us, will be streaming on Diane's Twitch stream, as we have done in the past. And everyone out there can check that out. We will have that posted all over social media. So Facebook and Twitter, we'll have that posted in pretty soon.
Awesome.
And we're going to be inviting a bunch of past guests to come on and talk about their favorite things from the year, enjoying some adult beverages along the way, and just, getting happy, if you will.
Very nice.
All right. So are we ready to bring James Morrow on?
I believe I am, if you are, sir.
I definitely am. All right. Well, when we come back, we will have James Morrow. Hey, you all know that I'm a supporter of Dreamforge magazine. You might wonder why you should support Dreamforge too. First, understand that Dreamforge is a new kind of science fiction and fantasy magazine that is looking for hopeful futures in a time when it seems hard to find that. Second, check out their magazine. The illustrations are beautiful. Personally, I was very impressed by the cover of the 3rd issue. Additionally, they have top-tier talent writing in the magazine, like Jane Linskold, Dave Weber, and Mary Soon Lee. They also have new authors to discover too. And if you're like me and read a lot on the bus, they have a portal set up for you, so you can read the magazine on your phone or tablet. There are plenty of other reasons to check them out too. You can find them at dreamforgemagazine.com. That's DreamforgeMagazine.com. Okay, and now we're back. So here we are with James Morrow. He is the winner of 2 Nebula Awards and 2 World Fantasy Awards. His work includes the Godhead trilogy, Only Begotten Daughter, and the novella City of Truth, the short story Bible Stories for Adults, number 17, The Deluge, and most recently, And the Last Trump Shall Sound, with Cat and Harry Turtledove.
Yeah.
You can find James at jamesmorrow.info and on Twitter as jamesmorrow1. Welcome.
Thank you, Alan. It's actually James Morrow 11 is my Twitter handle.
I thought you were killing me here. Sorry.
And technically, I'm not really a professor of English, though I like the way that sounds. I used to teach. Fiction writing at Penn State University. My wife and I live in the town of State College, adjacent to the big Cal College, Penn State. But I never ran any department, and I have no PhD.
The only time I have ever been to that little town, I was, because I live in PA as well, as our listeners know, and I was probably in my early 20s, and I was pretty drunk, and I remember passing out on somebody's floor.
That was my floor, I'll have you know. And I thought it was pretty rude behavior, and it's time that you apologized.
That's presumptuous.
But anyway.
Oh, many apologies then. Many apologies.
Apology accepted. Okay. You were young, as you said, and you live in this town, you get used to it. Great deal of alcohol consumption.
Is that
it's
true?
College town, really.
Oh, college town.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, I think it was once rated number 1 among the party universities.
Oh, wow.
A dubious distinction.
That's seriously, though. I went to one of as a freshman, I was at one of the, I think, number 3 or 4, which was Indiana University down in Bloomington, which had a massive fraternity sorority system.
Yeah.
Still does. Yeah.
Oh, the indiscretions of youth. Right?
Seriously.
So we are here to talk about your new book. Let's dig into that. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea.
So I guess I'll just ask like the origin story question. How did the idea of this book come about, and how did the three of you manage to get together? Because I've never really thought about the three of you as as a group of writers before.
As a crime-fighting team.
We've never...
Jim, you were in the project before I was, so you should tell the story, because I'm not even sure why you guys thought to rope me in. Go ahead.
The book is called And the Last Trump Shall Sound, and it's an anthology of 3 novellas by Harry Turtledove, sort of the prince of near future history and alternative history. And there's a novella by Cat Rambo. And the third offering is my novella. The premise of the novel comes out of brainstorming, the anthology, I should say, brainstorming between Harry Turtledove and the publisher, Rashid Mahmoud of Ark Manor House. Rashid was very troubled by the demagoguery of Trump. He's not himself a leftist, I would say, but he just thought that the country had become so torn apart that he wanted to somehow address the bleeding wounds from the perspective of science fiction. It's why God invented that literary form, that you can look at social problems through a kind of funhouse mirror. So, my wife just reminded me I need to correct the name. Shahid Mahmoud, not Rashid. Shahid Mahmoud is the publisher of Ark Manor. So together they came up with the notion of a near future where Trump has won re-election in 2020, and this is followed by 2 more successes by the Republican Party at the polls. So Mike Pence gets a first term. Mike Pence gets a second term, whereupon 3 states on the 3 West Coast states, and you're in one of them, right, Kat? Washington,
Washington.
yeah,
Washington.
Washington, Oregon, and California band together under one flag, call themselves the Nation of Pacifica, and secede from the Union. Harry's novella, which is the first offering in the book, it's called The Breaking of Nations, and it sort of delineates the immediate problems that this rift has caused. This sort of a cold civil war has broken out, tremendous tension between these 2 countries that occupy the same continent, but 2 completely different sort of political sensibilities. And he deals with, of course, the practical problem of there would be a lot of Trumpers and conservatives and Republicans marooned now in Pacifica. And the president, what's her name, Nicole Yoshida, I think, Japanese-American president of Pacifica, has to deal with getting these sort of hostile population out of her country, or at least neutralizing them in some, so they don't perform too much mischief. And then we pick up with my contribution, my novella, the Purloined Republic. When I was first approached by Shahid, it was at a disclave at the DC science fiction convention. He said, or rather Capclave, he said, "Jim, I really think you'd be perfect to round out the roster of authors. I've talked, Harry Turtledove definitely wants to do it. We've signed up. Cat Rambo has expressed interest, and Jim, I'm gonna count on you." And I did not like the premise at all. I found it such a downer. I said, "I'm sorry, Shahid, I think your company is doing noble things, and I bless the project, but I cannot get on board with this. The thought of 8 years of Mike Pence following former use, no, it'll drive me off a cliff." I went home and slept on it, and woke up remembering one detail from Shahid's pitch, which is that when the curtain opens on "And the Last Trump Shall Sound," Trump is dead. Pacifica has seceded. Pence is in the White House, and Trump has succumbed to, as Harry Turtledove puts it in his novella, like one too many double whoppers. Which I'm sure is intentional wordplay on Harry's part. Not one too many, of his extravagant, flamboyant falsehoods, but one too many sort of cholesterol burgers. So I said, what if in my novella, Pence got the idea that he had the power, owing to his Christian allegiances, to bring Trump back from the dead. That would be fun, to resurrect Trump in the Washington National Cathedral, America's house of prayer, right in the heart of the Republic. So I called up Shahid and said, is the slot still open? Because I really want to do this now. And he said, yes, it's still open. So I was off and running with my projections, not necessarily predictions, but warnings about what a Pence administration might be and how it would be shot through with theocracy, and also continuing some of Trump's initiatives against immigrants and people who made the mistake of getting born with the wrong skin tone. And then we have a novella by Kat, because it is bitter. And Kat, you could tell us about your contribution.
Well, I will say I actually had a huge crisis in that I got Harry's, and I was like, okay, this is interesting, and I'll be curious to see what James turns in. And then like 2-3 weeks later, I got yours, and I looked at it, and I was like, what the fuck am I going to write that's going to follow these two? Because one of the kind of really interesting things about this project, I think, is that they're very different novellas. And
Oh my
I
gosh,
think
yes.
each one, I would say, showcases, that author. I mean, Harry's is full of very careful, considered politics, and there's quotes from Confederate war leaders, and and it's all very alternate history, right? Which is what Harry's known for. And then James has this kind of wild satire and kind of biting, stuff that's going on. Which again, I would, this is what I'm just like, I don't know. So I had recently finished, I'd done an anthology, you maybe remember, like last year, called If This Goes, well, actually, it's where we got the name for this podcast, If This Goes On, which was political near future SF that was basically like, if after Trump, what will the world look like in a generation? And that was fun to edit, and it meant that I had been thinking a lot about that. So I chose to go a very sort of realistic route, and I also chose because because as the project had been explained to me, it's an effort to perhaps correct some of the kind of bizarre and horrible drift of American politics, and so. The message of mine at its heart, when you kind of pick it apart, is that it's not Republican versus Democrat. It's the rich folks versus everyone else. And that's why there is, in fact, a very kind of dystopian Black Mirror-ish ending, of mine, which, it sort of looks like it's hopeful. And then if you read carefully, you're just like, oh, shit.
Oh yeah, you definitely had a roller coaster ending there, Kat, because it was like, oh, it's gonna be bad. Oh wait, it's gonna be good. Oh wait, it's gonna be bad.
Yeah.
I guess the project was not a collaboration in the sense of the three authors meeting and coming up with a Bible for the overall book, or coming up with a coherent narrative through line. It was more like a round robin. I was given Harry's story, and I just ran with it, and Kat's story didn't exist at that time.
Yeah. And I had to. One of the things I did was I went through Harry's and took very careful notes, and then went through James's and took very careful notes. So I knew kind of all the dates and made sure that I had the right names, and tried to. There is an animatronic thing floating in the back reference, floating in the background of mine, and all of that. Yeah.
Harry and I appreciate that you sort of legitimized our stories. By making it seem as if they were really in conversation with each other, even though they
weren't. Even though there was no real effort to modify your style to be like everyone else, do you feel like the structure of the story or the contents of your story were somehow influenced by the other stories, other than just the internal facts being the same?
Well, I found it very convenient that I didn't have to explain the setup, that Harry Turtledove had done that for me. So I could just talk about the president of Pacifica and the political problems she faced, and the fact of Pence having now occupying the White House, as that the reader would just take all that for granted. And so I didn't need to do a lot of exposition, and I could get right into my central premise, which is that Pacifica's equivalent of their CIA, they call it the Bureau of Undercover Guile. Their CIA has decided to try to subvert the Pence administration, because, of course, Pence is waging war on them, in a sense, a kind of Cold War, making sure that pollution fumes go wafting across the border into Pacifica, et cetera, et cetera. They decide that they can swap out Trump's, or rather Pence's spiritual advisor, a guy named Walker Lambert, for a female actress. She happens to be a porn star. Her name is Polly Nightingale, but she's a dead ringer for Pence's spiritual advisor. She just has the same facial features, and she's an accomplished actress, so she can pass herself off as a man with the help of the Hollywood resources. They're, waiting to perform this transformation, the makeup people and the elocution experts. So she does pull off this masquerade and begins to offer advice that supposedly she's channeling from on high, from Jesus, but it's really just subversive premises, narratives thought up by the Pacifica CIA to make the Pence administration look foolish. So they institute what they call a poverty tax. And first, Pence doesn't even understand when Polly Nightingale presents this. No, this is what Jesus wants you to implement. And he says, "You mean a property tax? No, a poverty tax. Tax poor people, and therefore force them to finally go out and acquire some marketable skills and get to work." That kind of perverse thing. There's a perverse thing involving the NRA, which I won't get into because it's very unpleasant. He cancels Ramadan. He declares Kristallnacht a national holiday, etc., etc. The final the final piece of advice that Polly Nightingale, as the masquerading as the spiritual advisor, gives to Pence is, "You have the power to bring Donald Trump back from the dead." Turns out, and this is not really much of a spoiler, turns out it's an audio animatronics robot, which is why Kat mentioned a little while ago the use of that technology in it's at the center of my story and kind of a throwaway idea in hers.
I gotta say, and this isn't a question, this is just a comment, but Trump's speech is just unbelievable.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it all kind of came rushing out of my fingertips up onto the screen as just, he's been programmed with this sort of fuzzy logic, Trumpian algorithms, this audio animatronics doppelganger is able to improvise. I mean, there's a lot of willing suspension of disbelief going on, sort of able to improvise based upon its understanding of Trump's mentality.
But we should have found somebody who does a good Trump imitation to just read that passage.
As part of the promotion.
It would have been that would have been smart.
We could still try it. Yeah. I have no idea if the book is finding a readership or not, but
it's got a lot of Amazon reviews. Last time I looked, it had over 100 Amazon.
About 100. Yeah. They're mixed because the Trumpers, the Trumpeteers, have found the thing, and so there's a lot of them are troll reviews, and they're getting their friends to say what is the lingo that Amazon uses. This review was useful, I think.
Oh yeah.
So they're all clicking that, so that makes the 1-star reviews come up first, but. Enough whining. onto more positive subjects.
I was going to mention when you asked if you had found an audience, I was going to say, when I went and logged it on Goodreads, because I use Goodreads.
Yeah.
The first thing on there is by a Trumper, and I was just like, oh god. It was just like some nonsense.
I had no idea that was going to happen. I thought that it would mostly the people who would show up would be fans of myself and Kat and Harry, and but the tentacles of the Republican Party reach everywhere, and so in my naivete, I was not prepared for that. I can dismiss it, but it's still troublesome, and you see it in look at the election results. 70 million people said yes to Trump, and they've bought the narrative of the stolen election, and they had their march outside the White House. So of course that's gonna happen.
I actually was hoping for some really juicy controversy, to have something like Rush Limbaugh denounce us, or
that would be great. Yeah, that that kind of 1-star review I could live with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, with Kat and with Harry Turtlelove, you might not know their politics based on what you've read, right? But you, James, I mean, it's pretty freaking obvious. I mean, if you've read more than one thing by you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've always been
It's there.
grinding political axes. My kind of secular humanist fear of creeping theocracy that I think has been taken, sort of certainly taken over the sensibility of the Republican Party. You'll find certainly a pacifist theme in a lot of my fiction. This is the Way the World Ends. My third novel was very much a leftist satire on the East-West standoff. A dark comedy about the arms race. One review, I think it was in the Chicago Tribune, said it picks up where Dr. Strangelove leaves off. Another major motif in my fiction is what I call the necessity of feminism. So yeah, I do wear my biases on my sleeve. I like to think that when I'm on my game, I'm giving credit to both sides of any controversy. I love courtroom dramas. And 3 of my novels pivot on courtroom dramas, in which I try to take seriously the positions I don't agree with. There's a courtroom drama at the end of This is the Way the World Ends, where the people who never got to be born because humanity managed to extinguish itself stage a trial in Antarctica under the Nuremberg precedent, and they put the perpetrators of the Third World War in the dock and accuse them of crimes against humanity. They have rounded up among the survivors are people who arguably are guilty of having allowed Armageddon to happen. And my novel about the coming of the Darwinian worldview turns on a huge debate on the question of whether or not God exists. And my heroine, who is not invested in the question at all, but because she's a good friend of Darwin's, she's in charge of his menagerie that he's keeping at Down House in the months and years following his voyage around the world. She decides that that in Darwin's theory is an argument against the existence of God, so she runs with that, etc. So because I think the measure of worthy fiction is its villains, and I think you have to take the positions you don't agree with seriously and not present mere caricatures of them.
So tell us about the book. You said the book that you're working on now deals with corporations, which I am, or at least corporations play a part in it, which kind of taken with all of this makes me even more intrigued by it. Can you tell us a little bit about the current project?
Well, it's essentially, now you've put on your interviewer hat. Okay. Fabulous. Okay. The novel in progress is titled "Those Who Favor Fire," and it's really about climate change. I've always wanted to use that title from Robert Frost, "Those Who Favor Fire," and it was on my nuclear war novel in manuscript stage, but at the time there was another novel with that name on the runway, and so we decided there'd be too much confusion between the two. But now, years later, I can use it. The premise is that there's a kind of mirror civilization to ours under the ground. So it's a kind of hollow earth theory thought experiment. And this underground world is suffering from global cooling. They have an ice age coming, the civilization of Quandonia. And the plot has my hero, who's a presidential speechwriter, being abducted by the Quandonians because they need his linguistic powers to sort of sell a bogus cure for their climate change crisis to the public. And at one point, he's himself acquires almost the same sort of supernatural powers that these Quandonians have. They have fabulous ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level, and their idea for curing climate change under the ground is to remove the core of the planet and put it in place of the moon, and then take the moon and put it at the core of their planet. And they've reheated our moon, because there used to be vulcanization on our satellite. So they want him to use his powers also to help them solve a problem they're having with American corporations. That, I don't know if you knew this, but the final stage in the life cycle of an American corporation, those that fail, that don't succeed, by being bought up by another corporation, or by diversifying, the ones that actually fail, like Hertz and E.F. Hutton, they transmute ultimately into Godzilla-type monsters, and they find cracks and crevices in the earth, and go down to Quandonia, to the hollow part of the world, and try to live there peacefully. But some of them get manipulated by the engineers and turn into monsters. So I just had a lot of fun with the idea of the end stage. Well, the corporealness of a corporation, the fact that embedded in the term corporation is the notion of it being alive, it being a body. And of course, courts have, both national and international, have again and again affirmed the personhood of corporations. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm playing with. So, you have like Standard Oil, an obsolete corporation, transmutes into this creature called a petroloid. It looks like a giant crab, and goes around the landscape, sort of dribbling oil behind it. Lehman Brothers, of course, became obsolete owing to the crash of 2008. It gets transformed into something called a kleptosaur, and goes around stealing things, like putting buildings in the pouches of its hide.
I love that.
I love it.
But along the way, the reader learns a fair amount about the history of American corporations and some of the international corporations too.
So obviously you've done a lot of satire in your career, James. Do you think satire helps change things? And a second part of this question is, what's the advantage of doing satire over like a space opera or, a second world fantasy or something like that?
That's a good question. Does satire ever change things? There was a recent interview with Gary Trudeau, who said, of course, that's the hope, that's the illusion that satirists, I guess, need to get up in the morning every day, that it's really going to make a difference. And I'm trying to remember, he actually did. There was a horrible law somewhere on the books in California that was essentially a stop and frisk Black people law, as I recall. I don't remember the details. And the progressive element that was against this law used Trudeau's, they called it the Doonesbury statute, that struck down this horribly sort of totalitarian, certainly racist, a very racist statute. But Gary Trudeau says, of course, that's the exception. I do believe that satire can make a difference. And I suppose that I'm in the game to try to give people ideas they've never had before. I regard my fiction as thought experiments, and I'm not telling people what to think. Well, yes, I am actually. I'm trying to make a good case for my, sort of post-enlightenment secular sensibility. And as I've been saying, by taking the opposite viewpoint seriously as well. But I think that when a satirist is on his or her game, the conversation, the national, the global conversation is enriched, the great post-enlightenment conversation. Sometimes you even get to add a word to the vocabulary. You get to put a word in the dictionary, as Orwell certainly did. With 1984 gave us notions like Big Brother and Newspeak and doublethink that are extremely useful for talking about what's happening to us, for talking about the situation. Orwell, famously remarked that that satire is not, that his kind of dystopian satire is not a forecast of what's going to happen. It's not a prediction. It's a warning. And it's about what's happening right now, that Orwell was very troubled by the way that totalitarian ideas had captured the imagination, not only of brutal dictators, but of many intellectuals who were his contemporaries. So he's scribbling away, writing in 1948, hence the title of the novel, 1984, The Transposing of the Digits. He's scribbling away on 1984. He's very depressed. He's dying of tuberculosis, sends the manuscript to his publisher, who says, this is the darkest book that's ever crossed my desk. We can't do this. And then Orwell sent a plea or an explanation that no, this should not be taken as prophecy. Certainly Joseph Heller's great satire was privileged to enter the dictionary as a concept that's very useful. Catch-22 is very useful for talking about what's happening. And arguably Catch-22 was not really about the Second World War at all, but about this peculiar logical illogic, this irrational rationality that had descended upon human affairs, particularly in the United States, particularly in the corporate world of the United States in the 50s, post-war. It's really a novel about the post-war world, projected backward into the horror and the carnage of the Second World War. I think with H.G. Wells, The Island of Dr. Moreau is arguably a satire. And I think that concept of Dr. Moreau's Island, where these diabolical biological experiments are being done for no purpose whatsoever, for their own sake, by this madman, it is useful as we confront the brave new world of genetic manipulation. Yeah. We're all sort of on Dr. Moreau's island now. And, another science fiction as warning, I think Wells is saying, or this is certainly the one interpretation, that, he's saying you can't play God without going insane. And Moreau is manifestly crazy. That's Freeman Dyson's interpretation. Wonderful essay by Freeman Dyson in his book called Disturbing the Universe about the island of Dr. Moreau. So that's why I do it, yes.
So would you say that all science fiction and fantasy on some level is satire? Maybe not all out front, but...
Well, you mentioned the space opera, which I would say is manifestly not satire. But I think all the other versions of all the other flavors of science fiction lend themselves to that. But no, I think it's essentially a visionary literature. It's much of it is attempts to be a realistic literature about the future. I think that's what Gregory Benford would say.
One of the things that I sometimes hear tossed around is this idea that science fiction is about our own times, and I would argue that this is true, and that it's always about our own times, and so that lends itself to satire very well. Basically saying this is our current situation, but I put this not window dressing or particular. I don't know, texture on it. I don't know exactly how I'd describe it. But, it's a story about humans, but we've got rocket ships. I guess that's not really a good example because we have rocket ships nowadays. But you know what I mean. Flying cars. We're never going to get flying cars. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. I mean, it seems like to me, being a fairly avid science fiction reader, that, yeah, to some degree, I mean, science fiction gives you that space to comment on anything about current reality, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if it would be desirable to engage in authentic prediction. It's happened. Certainly,
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke was on the money when it came to communication satellites and quasi-conscious computers, etc. But I think that the fiction, the science fiction that stays around and most blesses us is not rigorous extrapolation at all, but the more sociological.
Yeah.
And then the question of to what degree are you warning about a future that you, as a alleged visionary, see on the horizon, or to what degree you're simply trying to capture the zeitgeist? That one doesn't have to call that question. I thought that in your novella, Kat, because it is bitter. Where does that title come from? That's a line of poetry, isn't it?
Right. It's a Stephen Crane.
Yeah.
Because it is bitter. Because it is my heart.
Because it's my heart.
Seemed very resonant with American politics.
Yeah. A very vivid and dark little poem, as I recall. That you're, the idea of the plutocracy as this force that is not going to give up its power, its hegemony, and that is in the business of stomping on people, as to use the image from Orwell. I mean, that's both happening now and will probably, to use the name of your podcast, if this goes on, this will be part of what goes on. Yeah.
Right.
Isn't that a Heinlein?
Yes.
Doesn't that trope go back to Heinlein?
Is. Yeah. It's a Heinlein story, which I loved using it as my anthology title as a tribute to Heinlein, and the fact that Heinlein was highly political in his time. And I had so many people say to me, "Did you know?" That's the title of a Heinlein story.
Yes, of course she knew.
So, would you all be willing to move on to talk about politics a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, James, this is something we occasionally discuss with our guests. I mean, I'd say that we generally float around politics, but sometimes we address it directly as well. And you mentioned you'd hate to have to predict the future, but I was going to ask you a question about that. In all seriousness, though, where do you all see us going from here? I mean, do you think now that Biden is more or less in, things are going to get better? Are things going to get worse after, just what do you think long term?
I think Kamala Harris is going to become our next president because Biden's going to step aside before he finishes his first term. That's my prediction, but my crystal ball is cloudy. And I think there's cause for guarded optimism. I think the election made me as a standard issue white liberal wake up and see that maybe I'm the one who's living in a bubble, or we white liberals have our own kind of capsules that are not visible to us. And 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. And what we thought was going to be a repudiation of the Republican Party for having created the Trump beast and then bowed down before it and behaved and addressed it only from a sycophantic perspective on their knees. They the 70 million said, we're okay with the Republican Party. In fact, we're going to take seats away from Nancy Pelosi in the House. We're not going to give you the Senate. So that's pretty grim. I think the crisis is still there. Biden's going to have a hell of a time getting legislation passed. But I'm a qualified optimist. I've often compared to Kurt Vonnegut because we both are science fiction satirists.
Yeah.
Vonnegut, to my mind, was God rest his soul, was essentially a nihilist, a kind of chipper nihilist. I think he once said he's in the business of purveying not sugar-coated bitter pills, but bitter-coated sugar pills. In that, at the end of the day, there is affirmation in Vonnegut, but there's also this well-earned nihilism, I think, coming out of his personal experience of having almost been, parboiled during the bombing of Dresden. But I'm optimistic in that, the American experiment, on the whole, with gross lapses, and such as the incorporation of slavery into the Constitution, with grotesque and gross lapses, remains this amazing experiment that's unprecedented. This driven by the Enlightenment, of which I am a child, an unapologetic child of the age of reason. And, here you had these very intelligent founding fathers saying we don't want to create another theocracy. We're sick to death of the wars of religion in Europe, and let's see where an enlightened political philosophy with roots in the Greek experiments and with philosophical rigor, John Locke's ideas, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see what we can forge out of this. The experiment remains in place. It's been abandoned by people like Mitch McConnell, who want to see, the great experiment replaced with the kleptocracy or the plutocracy that you write about, Kat, in your novella. Certainly, for Trump, it's just a matter of he wishes that America had become a kingdom with guess who's sitting on the throne. But the Constitution is still in place.
I'm very much of that same cynical optimist camp, and it is very discouraging right now to watch the Trump administration trying to plant as many landmines and bombs for the Biden administration as they can. And it's just grotesque to watch, actually. Absolutely. But it is. The other thing is that for the first time, I think there's a conversation about privilege that has surfaced in America, and particularly about Black lives and the police and what is the role of society, that I would hope has opened up more of the conversation that honestly started when Obama was elected. And suddenly a lot of the kind of racist shit that had been underground was forced to sort of bubble up and be confronted. And it is discouraging that Trump has valorized hate and valorized lying and has just made utter mockery of so much. But we are seeing the examples of some people that are out there fighting the good fight. We're seeing a lot more Black candidates being elected. We've seen some of the first in terms of transgender and non-binary candidates as a result of this election. I would hope that Georgia is going to go in a good direction in January. We'll see.
Oh, gosh, I hope.
Yeah, I'll be on the edge of my seat. Yeah, that's a very good point. And we're not going to turn that clock back. It is frightening that, the people who showed up in Washington and saying, stop the steal, were they weren't like Huxley's cheerful robots. They were like grumpy robots saying what they'd been programmed to say. Oh, yes, the deep state. Fake news. Yeah. But I just like to think you can't sustain that indefinitely because it suffers from the defect of being false.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
utterly false. I think it's ironic that we're told that we live in this world of which, reality is up for grabs, and, maybe postmodern academia is to blame for that to some degree. The idea that, everything's a narrative and no particular way of interpreting the world is privileged or whatever. That's sort of postmodernism in a nutshell, radical relativism. But what it strikes me is that no, we actually do know what is the case. It's not been problematized.
Do you remember in Huxley's Brave New World, and there's that scene where they go into the nursery and there's like the recorder that's repeating the messages that are kind of implanting them in the infants, and it's like, oh, it's so good to be a gamma. And, the thing is, we have that nowadays. It's just that we don't do it while people are asleep, right?
Yeah.
It gets beamed at them while they're at the gym and the bank and the bar. And, God knows, almost so many people have television sort of constantly on in their houses all the time.
And it's tuned to Fox News.
Pathological.
Yeah. So how do we get these people to see reality?
I really don't know. I have relatives I have two relatives that recently fell prey to this, where I'm just like, you are kidding me. And so I don't even know what I'm going to do. Maybe here's a link to this podcast in which I express my great disappointment in you, Petey.
Yeah, I have no answer other than, don't leave the field. It's not been ceded to either side yet. So like on Halloween, our Black Lives Matter sign was stolen. So we got a new one. We got two new ones, and now they're both out there. So just keep at it. Because we have seen a revolution, as Kat was saying, a sort of revolution in pluralism, going more or less beginning with Obama. And I remember everyone was so buoyant and optimistic before all the obstruction kicked in about what the Obama moment meant. And I was weeping when he was giving his acceptance speech. And at the time when Trump became the successor of Obama, some commentators who I agreed with said, this is an anomaly. There had to be this backlash. But, as Martin Luther King said, I think quoting someone else, the arc of history, it bends so slowly, but it does bend toward justice.
Yeah.
So we have a question that we ask all of our guests, James. This question is, what is giving you hope?
Wow. Well, that's taking me by surprise. No, I guess the fact that, at least 7 million people, more than Trump got in votes, said, enough of this nihilism. I think that, cynicism can be its own sort of sentimentality. That's and that, pessimism can be its own sort of naivete, I think. So there's no profit. There's no profit in cynicism, and nihilism has its glamour. I have fallen into that trap where I have put scenes of violence and extremely sort of dark destruction on screen in my fiction because it's sexy. It has spectacle and grandeur, but it's a trap, and we just have to outlive it. I think the great post-Enlightenment experiment called this Republic of the United States is still intact. That gives me hope.
Great, thanks for that. What are you working on right now that you want to put out there into the world? What are your next projects?
I've talked about my climate change novel. I've recently rebooted a cycle of short stories that I began back in the 80s called Bible Stories for Adults.
Oh my God.
James Morrow retelling narratives from Scripture through his sensibility, retelling them in a way that highlights something that I find interesting in the Bible stories, some particular cruelty or inanity. And so one of them just came out. It's my take on the narrative of Samson. And it's called, it's a, what did I call it? It's called the Jawbone. That's right. And the Jawbone becomes a metaphor for the proliferation of weapons in Samson's world. Everybody wants a jawbone, and it becomes a satire on the NRA mentality. And I think the upcoming issue of fantasy and science fiction will have my second reboot of the Bible Stories for Adults cycle. My take on the story of Jonah. As a woman, her name is Joanna, and it's called The Big Fish. And I have a few other Bible stories in mind. So that's my project, other than the climate change extravaganza.
All right, awesome. That wraps it up for us. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And as you know, I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time, and I actually never expected to interview. So this was quite awesome for me.
Well, you're very welcome. And this has been a very stimulating conversation. Excellent questions from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kat. So that was our talk with James Morrow.
Oh,
very awesome.
So much fun.
Oh, he's so funny. Oh my gosh. So funny. Something I always say about all the people we interview is just, wow, so smart and so funny. It's just like talking to one of his books almost.
Yeah. And he's so well read that it's fun to talk to him, because you can kind of throw out a reference and he'll catch it, which I like, and it's just really cool.
Yes, it's actually pretty amazing to me how you all remember all of these references, because unless I've taught something, I generally don't remember the references very well. Like, I've taught a lot of Shakespeare, so if it's a Shakespeare joke, I'll probably get it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think one of the advantages that I had, and which I suspect James had as well, is that I grew up pre-internet. And that meant, and I was also a very fast reader. So there are a lot of books where I went back and read them 4, 5, 6, a bunch of times, simply because they were the only reading that was possible. And I also grew up in a family of academics. So there was also a lot of kind of like wholly age inappropriate reading for me as well. So,
Right. And I loved his positivity about things.
Oh,
I actually did not expect that.
No, he's a sweetie pie. You don't expect it, right? Because you read the books and you're just like, oh, this.
Yeah. Wow. Because he's just got that stinging wit, if you will.
Yeah.
So, any books that you're reading right now?
I actually am finishing up on volume 2 of this great 2-part series edited by Rafia Zafar, which is Novels of the Harlem Renaissance. And I am currently on one of those written in the 1930s, Black No More, which is actually science fiction, strangely. And I mean, not strangely enough, but it is early science fiction, and it's kind of cracking me up. It's very, you want to talk about incisive and on the mark social satire. It's great. So I've been reading that, and I have been sort of dipping into Ursula K. Le Guin's Tao Te Ching, a book about the way and the power of the way, which is her book about the I Ching, which I had not hit before. But Henry Lean has given a class on using the I Ching in your writing for me a couple times now, that I really liked and have started using pieces of in my own process. And so I wanted to read Ursula's take on some of this.
Interesting. I'm also reading a little bit of Ursula Le Guin right now. I'm reading her Unreal and Real collection.
So good.
Good. I've just about finished up the first half of the realist stories.
Yeah.
I think I've got one left. And
that collection is one of my all-time favorites because she put it together. And, she picked the stories and she chose the order. And so, when it's the like, for example, Those Who Walk Away from Amalas is one of the very first in the Unreal. And I don't know. It's so she knows how important that story was.
I was thinking about that story just today because I know that you, in your short story discussion group, have recently discussed.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's coming up for me. It's like 2 stories away from where I am, so I'm looking forward to that one in particular.
It's really interesting in that by now I think I have hit 4 or 5 different stories that are replies to that.
Huh.
N.K. Jemisin has one that came out in Lightspeed, whose title I should remember. There's somebody else wrote one called Those Who Walk Away. I have one that I'm working on. It's just interesting to see all the different responses to it. It's a great story. I'll be curious to hear what you think about it.
Interesting. All right. I'll have to make sure I take notes on that one then.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I just finished reading is this more of kind of an adventure novel, if you will. It's called Stoker's Wilde by Melissa Prusi and Stephen Hopsticken.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, it was published. It was like 2019. So fairly recently, but basically the idea is that Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker team up and fight a vampire cult.
It's awesome.
And I didn't know this, but they actually knew each other in real life, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah. I did know that, but I did not know that they teamed up to fight vampires.
They apparently did. It's kind of like, what do they call it? Epistolatory, if you know?
Yeah.
Done through letters and diaries and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Pretty historically accurate. I went and researched a little bit of the stuff while I was reading it just to test it out. You know what I mean? My only complaint would be, it lacks a little bit in the diversity. I think they could have done a little bit better there. I mean, of course you have Oscar Wilde, and of course he, is gay, of course. But even he kind of downplays it quite a bit, and there were no characters of color at all.
Yeah,
and I thought, well, they really missed an opportunity on that, unfortunately. But there is a follow-up that takes place in the United States, so hopefully they change that in the second volume. But it was, if you can get past that, and I don't blame anybody if they can't, it was pretty fun. It was very adventurous. I read it for one of my Halloween reads, because they're fighting the vampire cult. It's a pretty fun, rollicking adventure story, if you will. Lots of battles. Pretty much all the classic Halloween monsters are in there, you know what I mean? You've got a kind of a werewolf guy, you've got the vampire guy, that kind of stuff. They hit all of that. And they got some good witty one-liners, too. So if you're into that sort of thing, like epistolatory stories, the Victorian period, and classic-type monsters, and you can get past the diversity thing, it might be an interesting read for anybody out there. And so I think that closes up for us.
I think so.
Do you have any announcements for yourself that you would like to make?
No. Well, when is this coming out? Because I will say something timely. Because if this is coming out New Year's, I'll say Happy New Year's. But I'm not. When are we thinking this will go up?
This should be out, I'm thinking, before Christmas, hopefully.
Before Christmas. So Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, happy holidays to all our listeners.
Yeah.
And don't forget, we're going to be doing a live Twitch stream.
Yeah.
With some old guests. Everybody who's going to be there is still in flux. We're still figuring it out. It'll be pretty cool. And everybody out there, please, if you like what you hear, check us out on patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. We've got multiple tiers you could choose from. We recently did an interview with P. Jelly Clark. He was chosen by our Patreon members to interview. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. We've been doing some book giveaway stuff as well. And I haven't been pushing it too much lately, but I think I've got some ideas for a few bonus episodes that we could throw up on there fairly soon as well.
Stuff
is coming.
Awesome.
And check us out on Facebook and Twitter. You can find us out there as well. Just search If This Goes On, Don't Panic, and we are the first listing. All right, so goodbye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey, with production by Sound Maiden. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower, additional music by Christopher Snydrosky, and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robison. Special thanks to our guest, James Morrow. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.